Juniper Books presents The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD from his notes recorded at the time. Chapter 15.
28th of March, 2026. Only to find that doing what I wanted to do wasn't going to be so easy, as a barrier had been erected, and a guard was overseeing the coming and going of every person and vehicle. Obviously, security had been beefed up since I last was here. Why, though, I had no idea, but I was kinda encouraged by the size and obviously weighty, massive trucks. So, there was one more use of the marks, which took me to 2010. Where there was no guard. And then, once I was in position, hiding behind the entrance, I returned to the present, where I waited a short while until a lorry arrived and stopped. Once the driver's detailed had satisfied the guard and he was given permission to move forward, I can honestly say that my entire life, short as it was, flashed before me as I got to my knees and reached out my right hand, laying it flat on the concrete, less than a metre away from two huge black rubber wheels which were part of the back section of the lorry. I found myself breathing fast and deep, and I closed my eyes. Incredibly, it didn't hurt as much as I imagined it would, at least for the time it was actually beneath the tyre. But it was the sickening crunch I heard that caused me to scream and almost pass out. And then, a second later, it was over, and I remember hearing the lorry's air brakes, and it stopped moving, along with a gruff voice shouting at the same time as I felt pain such as I never, ever wanted to feel again. In my imagination, it was similar to putting a hand into a saucepan of boiling oil. It was so overwhelming that my consciousness was unable to handle it, and that was the last thing I remember. 3rd of June, 2026. Well, a great deal can happen in 3 months, particularly if nothing happens at all. Although some workers reported me as shouting incoherently before an ambulance arrived, I've got no memory of that. My first memory after destroying my hand was coming around in a semi-darkened room of St. Bart's Hospital, surrounded by and attached to an array of complex machines. I was not in pain, but I most definitely felt drowsy. At that time, I had some questionable memory of being close to the wheels of a slow-moving truck, but the fullest extent of my memory did not return until later. And then I immediately felt sleep again. And I was awakened by a nurse tidying me up, or rather the bed, for not long after a trio of doctors entered, 2 women and a man, and after questioning me and looking at my chart and discussing me as if I wasn't there, they wished me well and left. And only at that point, because the original nurse was fussing around and adjusting something to my right, that a powerful shock, similar to electricity, passed through me and registered on the machines, as well as an increase of pitch and intensity. And then, in a fraction of a second, every memory I possessed came into sharp focus, just as a camera lens does. It was rather like being punched in the face, an experience I suffered all too frequently at junior school. "Nurse, what's happened to me? I can't feel." "John, you have had an operation, a complex one, and it will take you time to recover. What did they do? It's my hand. Yes, the injury was too severe to save it. I'm sorry. I suppose the wide smile I offered must have shocked her, for she said no more, but rather hastily left the room. If she knew who I was, or who I used to be, she never showed any emotion, and she left me dazed but extremely happy. I expected this condition to continue. How could it not, after what I endured? It took 10 days before I was considered well enough to leave, and during that time my parents visited me twice, and my sisters and Sam 3 times. I was happy at last to hear the news that the encampment of reporters and film crews around my parents' house and also my luxury flat had vanished overnight as news of my condition was published. Unhappily, though, and to my concern, Jennifer never visited, and nobody collected me on the day of my release. I decided not to return to be cosseted by my mother and father, but instead took a taxi, by myself, to my London flat. It did not go unnoticed by me that we were accompanied all the way by an unmarked police car. Don't ask me how I knew. I just did. I was certain they were not reporters, and I was right, because when the taxi stopped outside my block, the large, black, new BMW did as well. Slightly bemused when I entered, I expected at the very least a kind word or a smile from Joyce, who was on duty. But as I stepped into the foyer from the taxi, who, by the way, the driver had driven me in silence with nothing more than a scowl, with my right arm in a sling and a bag of tablets, I was met with an indifferent silence. All she gave me was a brief nod, as if I'd only stepped out to buy milk. I'd offered her a nonchalant smile, but as soon as I saw that I was somehow not the flavour of the month anymore, I continued to the lift in silence. And before those doors closed, I saw one man in the car observing me through the large glass exteriors, while another was taking photographs. Upon entering my flat, the first thing I saw was the huge pile of unopened letters, which easily destroyed the harmony of the lobby, but those I chose to ignore. After switching on the heating, I ordered a takeaway. And while I waited, I called Jennifer on my second new mobile, which Maggie had bought for me, and she answered quickly, but sharply told me she was busy at the time. Therefore, I asked if she could visit tomorrow, and to this she reluctantly agreed, leaving me concerned, and not just a little puzzled. Nevertheless, pieces of an unknown jigsaw began to fit together. The suspicious staff in the hospital, the reluctance of my parents to give me any information about what was going on in the real world, the taxi driver, Joyce, and now Jennifer. It might serve you well to know that I spent the entirety of my time in hospital by myself in a private room, a room without a TV, and to which the only entertainment were old magazines and hospital radio, which I had to listen to by way of a grubby pair of headphones. Very hygienic. The room had its own private toilet, so for the time I was there, my visitors, I believe, were chosen very carefully, because I saw the same nurses and doctors day in and day out. And I now believe the treatment I was apathetically being offered each day now extended to my takeaway, for previously the man was cheery and chatty. That evening he treated me as if I'd just murdered his pet dog, so much so that I had second thoughts about actually eating it. Only when I began to eat while sitting in front of my TV did things begin to properly slip into place. At this point, you may have wondered where my iPad had got to, and the answer is, I don't know. I always carried it with me in a case slung over my shoulder, and if I were to take a wild guess, I'd say that it was stolen, either by someone at the metal factory or by the hospital staff. All things considered, I pumped for the metal workers, but whatever, it was gone, along with a significant amount of valuable data. Thank goodness for the cloud. My only consolation was that the person who had it would find it difficult to get into because of the overly simple passcode. But let me return to the first food I'd eaten in my flat for ages. It took no time at all to find, either on terrestrial TV, YouTube, or any other social media, that there was a significant presence continually building against me. When I looked at the statistics of anything concerning my name, to say I was shocked was an understatement, for there was a veritable tide of hate and anger, continually expanding and becoming ever more extensive. It was difficult to believe that this problem of mine had become so much of a personal, universal issue. And worse still was that this was not limited to English-speaking people. What I had done had become a worldwide epoch-making event. The news channels were particularly ferocious, for not in any way could they be viewed as impartial. I flipped channels frequently and watched with a growing sense of horror and indignation as my character and personality was being shredded. The words unconcerned, coward, nauseating and objectionable were being bandied about by just about everybody who was being interviewed. Only on a Sky interview with audience participation did one member of the audience speak with the slightest reverence for me. However, he was soon dismissed by the so-called moderator and booed, his argument coming from a Christian point of view having no effect at all. After an hour of this, I had gathered enough information to understand what was happening. I was being socially ridiculed on a global scale and labelled a coward because I had fatally damaged the one thing that had the probability to have so many probable and positive possibilities. Among those criticising my decision to destroy that which had turned my life upside down were just about everybody. Because let's face it, who could not do with going back to your younger life and changing a few things? And these people were just ordinary members of the public. The more intelligent professional people, particularly historians, vigorously raged against me to the extent that it was extremely difficult to listen to them. Without a trial or a jury, I was socially and comprehensively condemned. One woman on a talk show described me as the most hated man on the planet, while a French politician described me as the luckiest man in the world who failed to honour his gift, and then continued to suggest that I be put to death for my crime of destroying the most valuable gift a human could possess. I watched an entire documentary about the attempt to save my hand, and therefore the markings. But at the end of the hour, it was reported that the damage was so severe that no information could be obtained from it. As far as I understood, it was retained by the hospital, which I thought was gross. As you might be able to imagine, this global wave of hate put me off my Chinese, and so I sought the only comfort I could, which was my bed, but I had a hard time going to sleep. 4th of June, 2026. I awoke to a cold and oddly silent flat. Normally the first thing I did was switch on the TV just for the company, but that morning I didn't dare because I couldn't see anything positive coming from it. Although while sipping my coffee and checking my emails on my phone, I did accidentally open a browser and straight away came across the phrase Public Enemy Number 1, so I switched it off. which left me in total silence. One of the first things I intended to do was buy another iPad, but here I was naturally wary. At the time, I still didn't really understand the level of hostility against me on a public level. Were they disgusted with me? Or would some of them actually turn violent? How far would the police go to protect me? Would their animosity turn into actual physical brutality? Would a person who actually killed me be regarded as a public hero? Is that how much I was currently hated? And more important to me, how long before such animosity might wane? And what would happen to me in the meantime? These and 100 similar questions beleaguered me until I heard my door camera sound. Before I even reached it, I had a hope that it was Jennifer, and I was right. But she wore no smile as she entered after I greeted her in the hallway. All I received was a sharp grin and a curt nod, and I heard the words I didn't want to hear, but I felt she was going to say it anyway. "I won't be staying long, and this is for you." She handed over a white apple bag, and inside was a new iPad. "What's this?" "I was told your old one was destroyed in the panic to get the lorry off you, so..." "Thank you. How are you, Jennifer?" "How do you think I am?" "Oh, so you are pissed off with me. I thought so on the phone." "I'm assuming you've caught up?" "If you mean socially, yeah. I've been watching the TV." "And you question my attitude? Have you any concept of the condition you placed me and my family in? Do you know that my husband, myself and Amy have been placed in protective custody?" "No, why?" "Because the entire world is angry that I didn't stop you from destroying what's being called the greatest gift ever given to mankind. That's why. I'm being blamed. I shouldn't even be here." "Okay, well, that's not right. If you set up a press release, I'll tell the truth that it was my decision and that you had nothing to do with it." "Are you still that stupid? Nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to take your side. It'd be social and professional suicide for anybody, let alone a reporter. The public doesn't give a toss about truth. What they want is somebody who had the God-given ability to help people. You had that gift, and you destroyed it. Now, and probably before, as long as people can remember your name, you will be vilified. You will never know a moment's peace while people remember what you selfishly did." "But have you read The Sun this morning?" "Well, I have, and they've run a poll denoting the most hated people that have ever lived. And you want to know where you are in the top 10? Not really. Well, I'll tell you. Among the names of Hitler, Stalin, the Devil, Jimmy Savile, Jack the Ripper and Harold Shipman, I'll give you one bloody guess who's at number 1. "John Crabtree," I said softly. "John bloody Crabtree. Well, you got that right. Why? Why did you creep out in the middle of the night and do it?" "Because I couldn't see a way out. It wasn't a gift at all. Come on. You know it wasn't. Not for me anyway. But to just destroy it without ever realising its potential. I wish I could have transferred it to you, then you'd have understood. Well, nobody's going to understand now. Do you know that you've got 24-hour police protection and that they have firearms? I was sure I saw a car last night. I give up, John. Nobody's going to defend you. And if you thought you were a prisoner before with those markings, then it's worse now that you don't have them." "But it'll calm down, won't it?" "Yeah, it will, I suppose, after you're found dead. And even then the public won't forgive you. You'll be marked as the worst of the worst." "But I didn't do anything." "And that's the point. The potential for doing good now is lost forever. You could have done anything worse. if you'd have been able to heal people by touch and deliberately did something to prevent you from doing it. There are hundreds of scientists complaining that they ought to have been given the chance to at least examine you like a lab rat. What life would have been like then? What life have you got now? Oh, and one other thing. It's on the cards that the National Lottery is going to take legal action against you for fraudulence, so you might as well be looking forward to a spell in prison. I hardly think you will be treated in there as gently as you currently are while you've got your liberty now. I had no reply to that. Which means you will probably lose this place. Honestly, John, you'd be in a better position if you'd put your head under that wheel rather than your hand. And I'm sorry to admit it, but I think that's true. I can't see that the next few years is going to get any easier for you. And there must be somebody out there who can see my point of view, who can understand why I did it. For myself, I can't possibly imagine a single person, what man or woman, could not do with going back and giving a little advice to the person they once were. But I couldn't do that for everybody. You know that. We talked about this. People don't care, John. Of course they realise that the chances of you helping them were tiny. But what you destroyed were not really the marks, but hope. The slim hope that one day they will be able to meet the man who could help them fix it. That's why they were really angry and out for your blood. I really came out as the number one most hated. Go online and see for yourself. Perhaps I should make a statement. Myself. Create a blog. It won't make any difference. Can you imagine Jimmy Savile doing that? Remember him? And how he is still so reviled even after all these years? Oh yes, I can see the public reading his blog, explaining why he did what he did, expecting some form of public support. Be sensible, John. Then what am I to do? I don't know. Now that it's all exposed, I am almost as reviled as you because I was your confidant. And as some are saying, I was your advisor. Do you know what Morton won't even take my calls anymore? I have been expunged. So unless I change my name, that's my professional life gone down the toilet. Not to mention the threat to my husband's. Nothing. Can't you think of anything? Well, if I were you, while you have the money, I'd hire some professional muscle for when you go out, even to the market to shop. It'll be a start. And by being out there, you can judge the social reaction in a more practical way. And I'd grow a beard if I were you, to at least give yourself a fighting chance of not being recognised. And shave your head. All those begging letters are still in the hall. Any advice on what to do with them? Burn them. Because as sure as eggs is eggs, once it's announced that you've officially left the hospital, all those begging letters will probably be replaced by death threats. Jennifer. Oh, I realise that you don't want to help me, but if you know of any companies that offer professional minders, then, well, I'd be grateful. I'll see what I can do. Right. I must leave. I don't want to be away from my family for too long. Despite everything, John, I'm sorry that things have turned out as they have. I did have a thought last night, though. Oh? Yeah. Remember that old film, 2001? Of course. Wonderful film. One of my favourites. Well, it crossed my mind that you are like one of those apes in the beginning. In that scene where he picks up the bone and realises that he could use it to defend himself. I guess that was a pivotal moment of increased consciousness for him. And I wonder, in real life, all those hundreds of thousands of years ago, how he would have been treated by his tribe. Would they have treated him any differently as to how you are being treated now? You think that the marks could have meant a kind of evolution? Why not? Of course I could be wrong, but there again, going back to those apes, if it was going to happen, it had to happen to one of them. See you, John. You take care of yourself. It's doubtful that we're going to speak any time soon." "Really? Sorry. I can't risk it. My family means too much to me, and they come first." Jennifer left me feeling more despondent than ever, and all I could think of doing was returning to my bed. So that's what I did for the next 3 hours, after taking my 11 tablets. I'm sure that one of them was a member of the bespectacled family, because I only woke up when I heard my door camera. Still, so groggy, I peered at the screen and saw 5 men, 4 of whom were wearing dark military livery, so I let them up and waited by the door. On arriving, a pensive, clean-shaven, plain, clothes man of about 40 held up his identification, which I could see was MI5. "Mr. John Crabtree?" "Yes." "I have been authorised by His Majesty's government to take you into protective custody. Step into the hall. Failure to comply with this order means that we have permission to remove you by force." I stared at him with bewilderment and a growing sense of fear, but then glanced at the 4 uniformed military men, all carrying semi-automatic carbines, and I felt once again that old, familiar, cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. "My things. I need my things." "Not where you're going, you won't." Immediately outside my flat in the corridor, I was handcuffed by my left hand to one of the uniformed men, a man who towered over me and had an unfortunate ugly tattoo of a panther on his neck and jaw, so I was instantly weary and distrustful of him. After I heard my door close, as a tight group, we walked towards the lift, unfortunately passing a young woman neighbour who had opened her door a few inches in response to the noise. I caught her eye as she caught mine, but that was all, and by the time we were waiting for the lift to arrive, I had forgotten about her. Reaching the ground floor, I realised, perhaps thankfully, that I wasn't going to leave the building by way of the front, and under the nose of whatever guard was on duty, because I was marched left and led out past the huge rubbish bins where a black painted truck stood, its engine growling. It was of the same dimensions that was often seen delivering cash to banks and building societies. A further gigantic man opened the back door, and after taking 2 steps up, I found myself within the abdomen of the beast, and I was told to sit by one to whom I was handcuffed, my heart pounding so fiercely that I thought I might pass out. The other 3 men also took their places, and the door was slammed shut and then locked. The inside of this vehicle was also painted black, and beside the 2 rows of metal seats, there was nothing else to see, for there was no windows. To be honest, I had never felt so trapped. A moment passed, and then I felt it move. Only then did the 4 men seem to relax a little, but they still held onto their carbines. Disconcertingly, no one spoke a word, and I gained the impression that they had orders not to engage me in conversation. The first part of my journey towards my unknown destination lasted, as far as I could surmise, about an hour. And you may think me simple, but under such confinement as I found myself, and with my mind still racing from adrenaline, I found myself listening for clues as to where I was going, just as Sherlock Holmes did in one of his stories. The sound of a church bell, how rough the road was, if we turned right or left, that sort of thing. But within a couple of minutes I gave up, knowing that there was just no way I was able to reproduce that journey. But eventually there were a series of stops and starts, accompanied by men barking orders, and then the vehicle stopped, and the door was unlocked and opened, whereupon I was told to move, and myself and the man to whom I was attached stepped from into the night to find myself standing on an illuminated airfield. The man from MI5, and who had initially addressed me, spoke to the man to whom I was handcuffed. "Into Hangar B. He can prepare himself in there." Hangar B was exactly what it was, a hangar, but where a large helicopter stood. I was taken into a side room, unhooked from the handcuffs and shown the facilities, which consisted of a toilet. And after using it in the presence of the same large man, I was then given a coffee in a cardboard mug and told to wait. As much as I wanted to ask my armed captor what was happening and where I was being taken, I knew that asking would be useless, so I simply kept quiet and listened to the myriad echoing sounds of the airfield. I waited for perhaps 15 lonely, cold minutes before the MI5 man came in and my guard motioned me to get to my feet by standing himself and lifting his carbine up. At last, I felt the need to speak. "Where are you taking me?" But no answer was forthcoming, and I was moved outside and directed towards the helicopter where 3 more uniformed military men were waiting. As I had never been in a helicopter before, I felt my anxiety levels rising once again, but I knew there was not the slightest chance of persuading anybody that I didn't care to board it. At least it looked new and powerful. Once inside, I saw the space was used mainly for transporting cargo, and I was instructed to sit in one of the 4 upright seats. All the windows were opaque, and as soon as I sat, a silent man strapped me in, and the MI5 man sat opposite. I was at least grateful that I was no longer handcuffed, but one of the uniformed military men had joined us and took his seat. And so we waited perhaps 5 minutes until the door was closed, giving me another queer sense of being shut in, and the helicopter began to slowly move. My guess was that it was being towed out of the hangar. Then it stopped, and the first unusual sound of its engine started. For the first time I saw a trace of what appeared to be discomfort come over the MI5 man, and it occurred to me that perhaps he didn't like the idea of flying in one of these things any more than I did. The noise of the blades soon overtook the sound of the jet engine, and when I suddenly felt slightly heavier, I felt the vibrations at the same time. Only the military man with his carbine showed no emotion, as my weight seemed to increase and I was pushed into my seat. Having no reference to the outside world, all I could do was close my eyes until I felt normal again, which happened after several minutes. Again, I felt the need to speak, but this time much louder. "How long is this going to take?" But again, no answer was forthcoming from the MI5 man. And so there I was, locked in this metal vibrating tube. My future uncertain. I had no idea if we were heading to a place within the UK or to anywhere else, perhaps even abroad. All I could say was we were not flying at any great height, as my ears did not feel any difference in pressure. But could this thing be pressurized? I didn't know. What did I know about helicopters or planes in general, come to that? Yes, I understood the mathematics of flying, of pressure, direction, speed and heading, of moving about a vertical and horizontal axis, but virtually nothing about the practical or emotional aspects of it. And so I repeat, there I was, vibrating in sympathy with this huge machine, my life in the pilot's hands. Remember, it was night, and by that time I was sleepy, and due to the constant droning I may even have dozed off, but I estimated that the journey could have lasted about 3 very long hours, until I felt the machine descending and offering its passengers the smallest of bumps as it touched the earth. Straight away the engines were cut, and after undoing the harness, myself, the MI5 man and the soldier exited and took those same metal steps to an area that was now virtually pitch black. Quickly, my eyes adjusted, and when I looked up, the array of stars were beautiful. Wherever I was, it was well away from any light pollution, and I smelt the strong scent of heather. I recognised Ursa Minoris, commonly known as Polaris in the constellation Ursa Minor, immediately, and estimated that it was about the same degree above the horizon as I was used to, so I guessed that wherever I was, we had to be at roughly the same latitude at least. But I was given no time to indulge in stargazing, for I was directed to follow the MI5 man, and in no time at all we entered a low building constructed from concrete, and which inside was lit by hard strip lighting. We descended stairs, down 3 flights, and then walked along a bare corridor lit by the same harsh lighting until we came to an uncompromising metal door that looked as if it belonged in a prison. After it was unlocked by a thumbprint of the MI5 man, it swung open, and I was directed to walk forward, which I did, expecting him to follow me. But that did not happen, for the door was slammed shut, with no explanation, leaving me in a room perhaps 3 meters squared and about 3 meters high. It was only then, noticing only a low mattress resting on a concrete floor and a toilet in one corner, that I finally gave way to my feelings, and I spent a fruitless 2 or 3 minutes shouting at the door. But all that happened was the main overhead light was switched off, plunging me into darkness, before it came on again, this time as red, just bright enough for me to find the bed and the duvet. Honestly, I had never been so scared in all my life. I didn't undress. I wasn't cold. But as there was nothing to do, and hardly anything to see, let alone hear, all that happened was, I eventually fell into an uninterrupted sound sleep. 5th of June, 2026. From all the people concerned in this, what can I label what I've experienced over the previous 6 months? A farce? An experiment? A cosmic joke? But one thing of which I'm certain is that out of all the people that are or were involved, there is one name that above all had something to do with my downfall, and that is Maximilian. What was it that his sister Caroline had told me? That in some ways he's more powerful than the Prime Minister? So I asked myself, who else could pull off what is now happening to me? Those were the first thoughts that ran through my head upon awakening the next day. I say day, but I had no idea, so I had no reference at all in this cell. Yes, that's what I'm going to call it. I only believed it was the next day because I could feel stubble on my chin. For the moment, that was the only way I knew that time was passing, because there was precious little information that I could get from the harsh environment in which I had been placed, which was, in essence, nothing less than a concrete box. And moreover, a concrete box which wasn't disguised as anything else, as the walls, the floor, and the ceiling were unpainted. Apart from that metal door, the mattress, and the toilet, there was nothing. Of course, I knew it was June, and the cell wasn't particularly cold, but I could see no obvious way it was heated. And neither could I hear anything either. Of course, I yelled a few times, but nobody responded, and because of the dynamics of the room, my voice had a reverberating tone to it, much as a person might hear if they shouted in a concrete stairwell in a block of flats. I'm guessing that for many people, the idea of being submitted to being able to escape from an enclosed room might set off feelings of claustrophobia, and I was no different. This led to me hammering on the door in panic and shouting for help, but again, there was no response. I pressed my ear up to the door and listened, but I heard nothing. It was then that paranoia took over. What were these people going to do to me? Were they going to lift me up, wherever I was, and drop it in the sea? This soundproof, waterproof death box? Was that the only way they could ensure my total destruction? But there again, why go through all the presence of flying me hundreds of kilometres Even I could think of an easier and cheaper way of disposing me than going through what happened yesterday. If it happened yesterday. With no data to formulate any conclusions, what other choice did I have but to return to the bed and lay on it, drawing my knees up close to me, closing my eyes, and think hard, hoping that I could remember something that would explain my present predicament. But as you may well guess, nothing at all came to me, except that I suppose what was happening to me was a kind of effective sort of brainwashing. The lack of stimulus, the unvarying monotony, both were having a profound effect. And how long this continued, I had no idea, until I heard sounds coming from the door. My response was to push myself into a corner. My survival intention was to make myself as small as possible, like a cornered rat. The tall soldier who stood in the doorway was the same monster with the bad tattoo, except he no longer carried a weapon. What he did carry was a plastic tray, and he placed it on the floor and then retreated without saying a word. For some reason I didn't ask him for help, most probably because I knew there was no point. On the tray was a bottle of water and a bowl of warm porridge, but there was no spoon. So I was reduced to scooping the semi-liquid with my unclean fingers. This is what these people had reduced me to do. But at least two good things happened. Firstly, my hunger was satisfied, and secondly, I felt that my life was not now in any immediate danger. How could it be if they were feeding me? So what the hell did they want? This question was not even answered when the door sounded again, and two soldiers ordered me to stand, and then marched me along an unpainted corridor to another metal door. And when it was unlocked and opened, I was indicated just by a nod of one of them to go into it, which I did. And this found me into an entirely different environment, a room twice the size, and if I can use an outdated phrase, all the comforts of home, which was a step up, of course, but at the same time I found chilling, as I instantly realised that this might be where I was to stay for an extended time. This room had wall-to-wall carpeting. The walls and ceiling were white, and there was a comfortable chair, a bed, table, side lights, and even a small fridge. No TV, though. From where I stood, a second door was open, and beyond it I could see a shower and a toilet. More strip lighting was attached to the ceiling, and perhaps most intimidating of all were 4 cameras, each recessed in the top 4 corners of the room close to the ceiling. As this room was at least 3 meters in height, there was not a chance of reaching them, not even by standing on the table. Anyway, each was enclosed and protected with glass. Moments after I noticed all this, the door slammed shut, and I was an unwilling captive once more. It did not take me long to find a drawer attached to the table, and when I pulled it out, I was surprised to find my iPad. What new torturous game was this now? But that was answered the moment I powered it on, and I saw it had no signal, no connection to the outside world. Other than that, it worked perfectly, and I even saw a power outlet on the wall where it could charge. But it was obvious that whomever was keeping me prisoner had removed the SIM card. Further inspecting the room, I noticed some plastic utensils and a salt and pepper shaker on the table, and there was soap and a loo roll in the small other room. But equally disturbing was that there was no shower curtain, and 2 more cameras of exactly the same type were mounted next to the ceiling. So, whomever had planned this desired to keep me under constant observation. In the fridge, I found a dozen cans of sugary soft drinks, but nothing else of nutritious value. Of course, the implication of this I found depressing and worrying, as it was clear I was going nowhere, perhaps for a very long time. A further search failed to reveal anything of interest, such as my mobile, but by then I would have been enormously surprised if I had found a working one. With nothing else to do, I played with the iPad and found that apart from losing its ability to communicate with the internet, nothing else had been removed or disturbed. All my files, photos, videos, emails, text and mathematical forums, ideas, designs, sketches and treaties remained untouched. Assuming that whomever had placed me here was listening as well as watching, I spent a pointless 5 minutes shouting at one of the cameras, threatening death to whomever was doing this to me if ever I escaped before I gave up. One thing that escaped my initial scrutiny was brought to my attention a short while later as a small section of the room just above the level of the table opened by being lifted, and there, on a plastic plate, was more food which I took. The moment I did, the hatch lowered and closed again. This, you may think, was satisfying, as it was clear I was not going to starve to death. But as I was rapidly coming to the conclusion, there were worse things than going hungry. In my case, my lack of freedom dominated my every waking moment. Being free to do, go and say what I wanted was an essential part of being human, and it took me being locked away in solitary confinement to realise it. So, I ate the food. It wasn't so bad. But as I chewed, I seriously wondered what it would take for me to begin refusing it. What steps would my captors take then? Just what was the point of it all? I no longer had my hand and the marks. It most probably didn't even exist anymore, having been incarcerated by the hospital. So why? Why was I being held prisoner? Why was nobody explaining anything to me? Why was I being cut off from the outside world so effectively? Frustrated beyond measure, I stood and shouted again at one of the cameras. "If this is you, Maximilian, then..." I sat again. Just what the hell could I threaten him with? That is, if it really was him behind all this. As soon as I had finished the food, the hatch opened again, and on a small plastic plate were all the tablets the hospital had given me. It then occurred to me that after I had left the flat, someone else must have entered it and taken them, the iPad, and whatever else they imagined I needed. What else could I do but take them? And within a short time I felt drowsy, so I slept again, this time in the dark, as I had control over the lighting. As I closed my eyes, I had no doubt whatsoever that the cameras were able to see infrared. I woke up twice more that day, ate once more, and took more tablets, and slept again.
You have been listening to an audio production of The Luckiest Man in the World by Molly Cutpurse, narrated by John Crabtree PhD.